Hello, I'm Sean English, and welcome to this week's special edition of Watching Washington. It's Friday, December 2nd. Today, we will be discussing the current, former, and potentially future President of the United States, as well as issues like student loan repayment and government funding. We will also be joined by a panel of students from the American Presidency course. But first, let's look at the highly watched race in Georgia between Senate candidates Herschel Walker and incumbent Raphael Warnock. Early voting is underway down there as we are just 4 days from Election Day. Early voting numbers have soared. According to CNN, this Monday broke the record with a new total of 301,545 people voting early. Voters 50 years of age to 70 years of age were those with the highest turnout. But the African American voters had the highest demographic with 39.2% of the turnout. White people make up nearly double the total state population, so the black vote being close to 40% is an important piece of this puzzle. As we remember, Libertarian Chase Oliver took 2.1% of the vote. That 2.1% have two options: don't vote or vote for either Walker or Warnock. This direction that the 2.1% swings could decide this election. Republicans have officially taken control of the House with a 220 to 213 majority, with two races still outstanding that are leaning Republican. This sets the Republicans up for one of the narrowest House majorities in the 21st century. Though the majority may be slim, Republicans still hold the power over key committees and the crafting of legislation. It is also expected that they launch probes into the business dealings of Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden. This Republican majority also means a new leadership that will be important in deciding what does or does not get accomplished the next 2 years. California Republican Kevin McCarthy has won the informal nomination to become the Speaker of the House, but faces a slim path to officially get there.
Kevin McCarthy is trying to sort of keep it all together. You've got the presidential race gearing up. Donald Trump has already announced that he's running. You've got a lot of other Republicans acting like they're probably going to run. So he can, I think, attempt to be sort of an island of stability within that whole circus.
McCarthy must gain the vote of 218 Republicans in order to secure the nomination in January. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced that she will not seek a leadership role after the Democrats lost the House in the midterm election. She also said that after the attack on her husband, Paul, last month, she will step aside. She will remain a part of Congress as a representative of her San Francisco district. On Wednesday, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries was elected to succeed her. He will become the first Black American to head a major political party when he becomes the House Minority Leader come January. Former President Donald Trump is hoping that in 2024, he can become president again. He announced his intention to run for a second term last month. The announcement was made from his Mar-a-Lago resort, that same home that was raided by the FBI just 3 months ago for classified documents. Making this announcement in Florida brings up many questions to if current Florida Governor Ron DeSantis will run against his political ally. Two Alaska moderates, GOP Senator Lisa Murkowski and Democrat Representative Mary Peltola, won re-election. They were both facing challengers supported by former President Donald Trump. The state operates a ranked choice voting system, allowing candidates to win without necessarily getting the majority of the vote. Murkowski led 53.7% though, over the second place challenger. She said, quote, "I am honored that Alaskans of all regions, backgrounds, and party affiliations have once again granted me their confidence to continue working with them and on their behalf in the U.S. Peltola was only been serving in the Congress a few months after winning a special election this fall. She has now won a full 2-year term to represent the 49th state. President Joe Biden celebrated his 80th birthday recently, becoming the oldest president in history. Former President Ronald Reagan follows him as he was 77 at the end of his 2-term presidency. Biden was born on November 20th in 1942, while the U.S. was involved in World War II. He took his oath in office in 2021 at the age of 78. According to Axios, If Biden runs for a second term, many believe his age would be a liability. If he wins, Biden would be 82 years old on Inauguration Day 2025 and 86 at the end of his second term. Last week, CNBC reported that the Biden administration announced that it will extend the payment pause on federal student loans until after June or when it's able to move forward with its debt forgiveness plan. Federal student loan bills were originally scheduled to resume in January 2023, and this is the 8th time the administration extended the payment pause and delayed the start of its debt forgiveness plan. The Republicans are set to assume control of the House of Representatives in January 2023, which leaves House Democrats with a small window of time to accomplish as many of their legislative goals as they can. These goals include reforming the Electoral Count Act, providing additional financial assistance to Ukraine, providing financial relief in response to COVID-19, as well as striking deals to fund the government and pass the annual National Defense Authorization Act before the end of the year. Republicans will officially assume the House majority on January 3rd, 2023. According to The Hill, Democratic California Governor Gavin Newsom says he will not run for president in 2024, even if President Biden declines to run for another term. Newsom had been rumored as a possible Democratic candidate. He recently won re-election as governor of California last month. Newsom also recently criticized the Democratic Party for its messaging ahead of the midterm elections, urging members to be more aggressive and challenging Republican narratives. Although Newsom has criticized Democrats, polling has shown increased Democratic support around Biden running for re-election. Newsom said he hopes Biden runs and that he thinks the incumbent can beat former President Trump again if he is the GOP nominee. The attention is turning from the midterms to the presidential election in 2024. President Trump has already said he's running. President Biden has said he intends to run, but has stopped short of an official announcement. Other notable names that have been mentioned as potential candidates include former Vice President and Indiana Governor Mike Pence, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, and Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin. Today, we're once again joined by students in Purdue's American Presidency course to discuss 2024. Juntong Liu is our first panel. Over to you, Juntong.
Thank you, Sean. As you mentioned, we are fortunate to have several students with us today, and I have the honor to leading off our discussion. You all have been studying the role of the American president and discussing elections, including midterms like the one that we just had. And my first question is, how historically have midterms affected the presidency?
Well, historically, it's been definitely the president has been a driving factor in the midterms. I want to say if the president has control of both, the president's party, has control of both the House and the Senate at the same time, there have only been 2 times in American history in which they have maintained control of both of those after the midterm elections. And that just kind of comes with power sharing and more voters getting out there after the first 2 years of a president.
My second question is, how do you think this midterm, specifically 2022, will affect the next 2 years of President Biden's term?
So, as we've already seen, Kevin McCarthy is going for Speaker of the House, and he's currently kind of already putting pressure on the Biden administration to, he's pretty much forced them to work with him, kind of like what happened in 2014 with Republicans. And if anything, we might see some familiar situations such as what we had with Merrick Garland.
Thank you. Since Republicans have taken control of the House, the Democrats will keep the Senate. President Biden will have a divided government using a historical as a guide. How do you think that will go?
I think it'll be relatively okay. I mean, there are some things that some people are looking at that might not happen due to, the Democrats specifically still having one part of it that Republicans want to accomplish. Right now, the thing that comes to mind is Idaho is trying to expand their border a little bit and take I think it's almost around 60% of Oregon. And that would be a big power move for Republicans because they would be taking a bunch of red counties away from Oregon and adding House of Representatives members, taking them away from Oregon and adding them to Idaho, which would be a huge step in the right direction for Republicans. And I think that because the Senate and the House have to approve that, that's going to be a big stopping point for Republicans. So it's pretty detrimental to the Republicans that they didn't also take the Senate.
Is there anything that you guys want to add on? Okay. The next question is, how do you think this midterm, specifically 2022, will affect the 2024 campaign season?
I think it's going to force the Republicans to take a look at themselves. They were disappointed with the results in the midterm, so I think in 2024 they're going to have to figure out who they want to lead their party and will it be as effective as it was in 2022.
Okay. Do you want to add on something?
Yeah, I just want to add something like because I think the Senate was controlled by the Democrats and the Congress is controlled by the Republican for this term. So for the next a few years by this term, that's a kind of thing for Biden to. It's harder for him to pass the law through the Congress. I think that's a big divide for the future. Yeah.
Thank you. How does studying the history of the American president help you understand the president and look to the future?
From the study from this course, the most thing that impressed me is from 1915 to now. And I think today's society is kind of similar to the society that is in Martin Luther King's time. That's kind of similar because at that time the affirmative act was passed, and at that time the minority was protected more in the society. And in Biden's term, I think Biden just affirmed the protection of the minorities like blacks, Latinos, of all those races. And I think this kind of similar. And I want to compare I think the two times are kind of similar. And if the Democrats will lead the campaign, the situation will continue. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Since you talked about the history of American midterms and stuff, I want to ask, how do you think midterms before is different than the midterms now?
I think that now, not only do we see a jump in voting just by pure numbers because of a population increase, which is going to happen no matter what, we're also seeing a jump in voting in the midterms in a percentage sense. It's not just the pure number of voters rose, it's that the pure percentage of voters rose. The percentage of people in the country that would vote in the midterm elections rose. I think a big part of that is because of social media, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all those things. They kind of bring all those issues to the forefront. The example I think is Herschel Walker's Georgia campaign was heavily relied on by social media to get the word out about why he's running, why he wanted to run, what he can accomplish. And I think that social media has definitely changed the way that people look at not just the midterms but elections in general.
That's a great answer. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts, and I'm going to send it over to Ellie Akra now, who is with our second group of students. Ellie?
Thanks, Juntong. We're going to ask similar questions to our second panel of students for the day. Thank you all for being here. So you're all also a part of the American Presidency course taught by Dr. Catherine Brunell. And I know you spent a lot of time over the semester looking back at history. So my first question is, how historically have midterms affected the American presidency?
Well, it's interesting because the midterms have affected the presidency because it determines how much the president can pass their agenda going into their reelection. So with this case, this is interesting because you've got the Senate being retained by Democrats. That doesn't happen very much for the party in control. And you have one of the most narrow majorities in history held by the Republicans. So it's definitely not the mandate that Republicans were hoping for going into these midterms, and it's significantly going to affect how the landscape has shifted for 2024.
I think going off of what Chris said, it is harder for presidents to get their policies passed when the midterms don't go their way and they have clear opposition in the House and in the Senate, and that has happened many times throughout history.
Yeah, that kind of relates to my next question, which is with this unique situation, how do you think that the rest of President Biden's term is going to be impacted? Do you see legislation getting through, or do you see more bipartisan efforts or more stalemate?
I think we all hope to see more bipartisan efforts. I know that that's kind of what's been promised and proposed, and I think a lot of the time it takes some loss on either side to kind of go towards the middle to make some progress. So I guess that's what we're hoping to see.
Yeah, no, I think for Biden, it's just going to be harder. As much as I think everyone would try, for a more bipartisan effort, I don't think it's going to happen. It's just, there's just so many conflicts and there's so many controversies right now. So, it's definitely going to be tough for Biden in the next couple of years.
Yeah, definitely. And he issued a statement after Republicans officially won the House saying that he's ready to work with them. How do you think this will play out? Do you think that there's any specific issues that they may collaborate on?
President Daniels actually came and spoke to our class, and he brought up a good point that when there has been a lot of polarization in political parties, one party is bound to kind of reach towards the middle and branch out so that way they can get their agendas passed and there can be a stalemate, so to speak. And I think that's what Biden is trying to do here. It's definitely going to be a challenge because the Republicans have been known to not like him, and there is such a big polarization right now, and it just seems to be growing, so it is going to be quite a challenge.
I think a lot of it also depends on how the speaker's race and the within the Republican caucus is going to go. McCarthy is slated that he'll probably hold on to the speakership, but there are rumors that at least 20 Republicans are going to vote against him for the speaker's race, meaning that Democrats might actually take the speakership again. So how's that going to work in a House controlled by Republicans with a Democratic speaker if that happens? Now, it's not likely that that will happen, but if they were to make sure that McCarthy isn't the Speaker of the House and they were to nominate a more conservative member of the Freedom Caucus, then that's also going to significantly impair the ability of the House to work alongside with the Democrat Senate and a Democratic White House.
So whatever happens over the next 2 years, how do you think that's going to affect the presidential campaigns in 2024?
I think that 2022 was a rough one for Republicans, and I think it's already playing a huge role in how 2024 is shaping up. You saw that the day after the election, a lot of the blame got put on Trump because mostly Trump-backed candidates were the ones that lost the Senate. You had Herschel Walker not be able to secure 50% in Georgia. You had Dr. Oz lose significantly to John Fetterman, way more than was expected. Alex Masters in Arizona was totally lost. So I think that the blame's been put on Trump, and Trump is in the doghouse with the party. And for him to even have a shot at the nomination again, he's got to figure out a way to make his brand not toxic anymore. So I think that Republicans are in a tough spot, and I think it's anyone's game for the primary right now.
Definitely. So how do you think that studying the American presidency in this course has prepared you to look at the present and understand what might happen in the future?
The phrase history repeats itself is very true. You see a lot of reoccurring themes happen throughout history. One of my favorite things that is new, however, that we have studied in this class is technology and the rise of press, and how that has affected the presidency, especially campaigns. And I like to watch how that has changed the presidency. and that's slowly increased. And I think that's something that we can look forward to. And because we've studied it so much, we can kind of predict like how campaigns are going to adapt to that. And especially like we see that already with social media. A lot of presidents now have Twitter, and they use that with campaigns, and they use that to kind of reach younger voters and a more wider audience.
And,
Yeah.
oh,
Go ahead.
Yeah, and going off like the topic of themes, like you also see like one thing that we really focused on in this class is like patterns, you know. So like in this case, like during a midterm, obviously you see that the party in power usually loses during a midterm. So like just patterns like that, like you kind of know what to expect, you know, that party in power just, it doesn't do as well as, you know, it promises, so it loses. So yeah, just so like focusing on those patterns, you can really have a good idea of like what to expect in the future and how that might look like.
Yeah, something I've gained in this class is way more insight, and I feel like I'm a more informed voter because I know how campaigns run from reporting on it. And it seems like from your class, you've definitely learned that too. So that's really cool. I'll ask one more question about how you think the next 2 years will go. And that is, as it relates to history, do you think the president can actually make a difference in the legislative process when the government is divided, or do you think the partisan voices are too loud?
I think that's very dependent on like specific leadership, and it would vary by president. But I think especially now, since the House and Senate are like divided leadership, I think it could be more individual based on like who's going to be willing to compromise. Because even if President Biden does like kind of preach like reaching like bipartisan goals, then it really comes down to all of their individual vote.
Kind of building off of that, it does, I think, have to do with leadership. And I think it has to do with where the partisanship in the country is and where the polarization is. And it's hard to just say, well, Reagan could pass this with a divided government, FDR could pass this with a divided government. You got to look at the polarization as well with it. And I think that to kind of be able to analyze whether or not Biden will be successful in the next 2 years in a divided government, I think you have to look at the last probably 6 years, maybe 10 years of how the polarization has happened. And if you look at like when Donald Trump was in office, they didn't have that many legislative accomplishments except for like the crime bill that they passed. And even during the Biden first term, or the first 2 years before the midterms, the most significant legislative accomplishment that they had was the Build Back Better bill, which barely passed in the Senate because of Democratic toss-ups like Manchin and Sinema. So I don't want to say I'm pessimistic, but I think with the way polarization is right now, going to an election year, especially with Donald Trump and a potential Donald Trump-Biden rematch, I don't see the polarization being solved in the next 2 years, and I just don't think it's going to be that effective.
So finally, we'll touch on the youth vote. So the youth vote played a huge role in the midterms of 2022. How do you think that's going to affect the next presidential campaign season?
I think both parties recently have been trying to like gain the youth vote by appealing to ideas that relate to them, such as cost of living and especially college debt. And that has definitely affected their the youth vote turnout. And I think that's only going to rise again in 2024 because both parties are like really trying to get that youth turnout because they have affected like many races in both the House and Senate.
Any other final comments on that?
I think the youth vote, look, I think it was important in 2022. I think that the Democrats captured about 63% of the vote, I think. If Republicans want to be viable in the future, they have to reshape their platform to avoid controversial issues that youth are not enjoying. That comes a lot from social issues, I think. And they have to find a way to reshape their messaging back on an economic agenda, small government, and fiscal conservatism. I think with that, they'll have a lot more appeal with young voters who are worried about the state of the economy, who are worried about debt, and who are worried about these long-term economic issues. But the more and more they talk about social issues, the more they're just going to bury themselves with the youth.
Well, thank you all for being on today. It's been a pleasure to talk with you and learn from you, and wish you all the best of luck with the rest of your course this semester.
Thank you very much.
So with that makes our final episode of Watching Washington. We will be back next semester with a lot to talk about. A new year, a new divided Congress, and the 2024 election season getting underway. We hope you'll join us. I'm Ellie Akra, and for myself and my classmates, thanks for watching.